So we are going to spend some time talking about DBT 1.0, what that means to us, which, I don't have a ton of information to say here that isn't pretty well reflected in the 1.0 GitHub label. Has everyone had a chance, maybe recently, maybe a long time ago, to check that out and to see what we've got tagged there? Okay, if not, I'll just say it's a mix right now. It's some things that sound really cool, really exciting, and then some things that are just like, why is it called this way? That's confusing. Models technically are in a folder called models, but the way that DBT thinks about that in the project level is with a configuration called source paths. Why? Well, because that's what we called it before there was such a thing as sources. Maybe before we 1.0, we should rename this to something like model paths. So, nothing that's really all that interesting. It's just all the little Easter eggs that a really experienced DBT user might be used to, or just have it pass by your eyes now as archived, cataloged information. But a brand new person coming in will be like, oh, source paths, that's where my sources go. But where do my models go? Models, but that's the same. Yeah. So it's something along these lines. But there are some more substantive and substantial things here as well. That's not to say that everything with this tag on it or everything on this list is definitely something we're going to do before we release version 1.0 of DBT. But this is our rough guideline for right now. And definitely be checking out this label over the course of really this year, because we do plan to release version 1.0. I am saying this in a recorded Zoom call. Hopefully no one holds me to it all the way. But we do plan to release DBT 1.0 by the end of this year. And so that may mean reformulating or shifting around a few of these pieces if they prove more technically complex than they're worth from a user clarity perspective, or very likely going to be adding more and more things as we decide. I added just one thing here today. Decide, yeah, this is important enough that we want to at least take a swing at it. Maybe not hit it out of the park, but at least take a swing at it before we release version 1.0.
Well, when we don't get 1.0 out the door, I know who to come after, Jeremy. So
that's right. And I'll say, what's that thing that you desperately wanted? We'll have that in version 2.0. 2.0.
Right.
Coming out in 2020. Even then, I'm letting myself, holding myself to something else. No, it's okay, let's talk a little bit about why we're doing this. And Mila, you've got a background in software. Is that fair to say?
Indeed. I've been developer. I've worn a developer hat multiple times.
What does major version 1 mean to you?
It's so funny because I feel like major version 1 ends up meaning so many things depending on what team you're in. I think for me, the most reasonable definition I've encountered is that you feel like you've encapsulated a set of behaviors that meets kind of the starting point of an idealized image. That is to say, you've come to a place where you're ready to say, look, we've got from now on, when we make changes to our code, there's gonna maybe be things that break in the future. We're no longer just trying to support everything. We've hit a plateau.
Yeah, I really like the way you put that, which it is. It's a plateau in a healthy way, which is to say, I mean, I know, Amy, you're on the call, and I know you're quite the climber. It's like there's a satisfaction in getting up to a level where you can no longer be, I don't know, just dangling over the side of the cliff the whole way. Even though the exhilaration and the adrenaline is there, like you do want some place you can stop and look around and say, all right, look at how far we've come. So I would just point everybody to item 4 here of the semantic versioning specification. This is like an appeal to as high an authority as you can basically get. I could pull out the Bible too, but I think semvar.org is pretty good. Major version 0, initial development, anything may change at any time. The public API should not be considered stable. Like, how do we square the fact that DBT is major version 0 with the fact that we've also got thousands of companies putting DBT at the very heart of their analytics and data stacks every single day? Well, we square it by saying, making a lot of commitments around when breaking changes are going to be and what the goal of those breaking changes are, which is on the way toward this more crystallized and stable version where the code in your project does not need to drastically change anytime you upgrade. I think there are some other implications to this too. It's not just us communicating that level of stability and saying, all right, like the thing that you think DBT does, it does, and it is going to keep doing. That's very big. I can't overstate how important that is. But it also lets us do things like support fewer old versions of DBT. Right now, we've got folks using DBT in DBT Cloud, I think going as far back as minor version 13. Someone can maybe correct me if I'm a little out of date then. But that's, if I'm remembering, that's the version of DBT that introduced sources. That came out in,
I thought it was 14.
Maybe it's 14? Okay. In any case, it's something that came out in 2019, like the first half of 2019. There's a lot of DBT that's happened since then. And not even so many breaking changes since then, but some. So we need to be cognizant of the fact that upgrading from 13 or from version 14 all the way up to version 19, like there's a lot of DBT to get used to. You got a new config version in your dbt project.yaml. You got Jinja expressions in your project config. You got exposures, like lots and lots of stuff. We want that process of getting bug fixes and getting new features to feel really, really seamless. And it also probably means we want folks to be constantly using some of the latest versions of DBT, and that's just going to be smoother because there aren't breaking changes nearly to the same extent as there are today between minor versions. Does anyone have any thoughts or any questions about why we want to release 1.0, 0.0, or, got it up here, some of the stuff that we're interested in pulling in, and maybe some of the stuff we're not interested, if you've got a pet issue?
I've got one that's more of a implications of 1.0, which is, does that, so packages basically, does that mean that when you go from 18 to 19, your build won't fail and be like, you have to upgrade to the new version of DBT utils, which hasn't necessarily been cut yet? I know you're getting better at it, but is that going to rationalize a little bit more gently?
I think so. Yeah, that's a good.
With like the 5-train packages, I saw that apparently the LinkedIn one doesn't work at the moment. Sort of that sort of class of problem.
Yeah, we're very defensive right now in having these required DBT version bounds on packages that are really widely used, like utils. The reason being, we didn't have this defensive upper bound here for a past version. I think it was 17, which had this pretty significant change to DBT, had the addition of the config version. And something that we really want to avoid happened, which was we released a new version of DBT, no action was taken on most users' part, and for some users it was a breaking change because they got the latest version of a package, which was then incompatible with whatever version they were running. So right now we try to be really defensive. It's not a great feeling when you want to upgrade to the latest version, but you're using a package that hasn't upgraded yet. It's not ideal, but it's better than waking up to find, because of no action of your own on your part, there's been a breaking change in your project and you can't run DBT anymore. So like right now we have to be a little defensive. I think after version 1.0, we can really free up that version bound to an extent. It's like, hey, utils is always going to work with major version 1 of DBT. Unless maybe there's a couple of utils macros that like tap really deeply into some of the less documented who knows, the graph object in the Jinja context. I don't think so, but I know that a package I maintain does. So like, there's always going to be some things that can't be quite as stable and quite as open-ended with their version dependencies. But yeah, I think that's also part of the world we want to live in, is like, right now I get a lot of social affirmation when I get to post about a new version of DBT, and it feels like a celebration. It feels like a very big deal. I think post 1.0, it's not such a big deal. Like, hey, here's version 1.2.7. This has a fix so that Snowflake metadata queries are 10 times faster. Fingers crossed. No action needed on your part. In fact, we've already upgraded you if you were using version 1.2.6 in DBT Cloud. Like, that's a pretty neat world to live in.
Yeah, that's a world I want to live in.
We gotta do like 1.1 before that. We got a long way to go to get there. But I think that's part of the idea, part of where we want to live. Simon, who's not in this Zoom room, but I'll speak on his behalf, used to work at the company that made WordPress, maintained WordPress. There are definitely versions of WordPress. It's open source technology. Lots and lots of people depend on it. But for some of the user-friendly hosted products, some of the having people think about, am I using WordPress version 4.7? Like, it's not a great use of bandwidth if you're just trying to get started with technology. Obviously, if you are someone who builds an integration with DBT or an integration with DBT artifacts, right, then versions still matter a lot. And whether you're plugging into V1 of the run results or V0 makes a big difference. And there's an even prettier version of this that maybe we'll be able to show you soon. Compliments of Kyle, who's on the call, but I'm not going to put him on the spot right now.
Cool.
Yeah, I don't know, Mila, do you have a visceral reaction to hearing we want people to think about versions less? Because I did have a little bit of a reaction to that at first. Like,
Yeah,
no.
so it's interesting. I think a lot about the phenomenon of software going corporate, because if you really think about our software, it truly starts out as Drew and Tristan and Connor are mad that nothing's working as easily as it should. And because of that, I mean, it really is piecemeal on how these things have been put together. In the future, kind of the system is there, right? Like, the tool is being used, it's adding value, and you don't just, I don't know what it is, whether it's inertia but like innovation just kind of, I don't want to say peters out, but it slows down. And in a way, I feel like, given what I think of our team, I suspect that like we'll come up with other products to kind of channel that energy into. But yeah, I feel like, the visceral reaction is like, oh, maybe the mile a minute excitement of DBT versions is going away. And now, like you said, it's like, oh yeah, 2.4.5, we've added support for another warehouse. And it's like, well, that's cool. But like, it's not as exciting as like, remember when DBT added exposures and everyone's like, oh my God.
Yeah. An artificial dose of novelty into no, I kid. Yeah, I hear that. I agree with that. And a lot of new tools coming out today in the data ecosystem, without saying any names, basically data.noun, and you're probably going to end up on like a gorgeous static website that says contact us for the beta program. So there is some envy, to be honest, of like, oh, all these cool ideas, some of the most outlandish issues that are open in the DBT repo that would have us be doing some very cool things that we can't prioritize because we've just got these foundations to be building and these commitments to be maintaining. I think we can name that disappointment and own it, and at the same time acknowledge like that's a victim of success.
I also think that, and this is coming from my point of view as being the designated, make sure that we're not abandoning, our commitment to open source people person. I think the way I think about it a lot is that our goal here is that we still want to have the software of core solving really important data problems. And I think that one thing that's really going to be on our minds as time goes time goes on, because we're getting more enterprise customers, and that kind of inertia, not even because they're paying. I actually, that's not how we operate. It's more so that when you look at your user base, that influences how you're developing something to cater, right? So if the people who are using DBT are 100 startups, well, we're going to be thinking about really quick, high velocity startup teams that are looking to solve new problems and all that, versus like Pepsi doesn't want to change, JetBlue doesn't want to change things, or, they have so much data to manage. They just want it to be stable. And so I think that one of the challenges for our team in moving on past DBT version 1.0 is going to be trying to find that middle ground and trying to make sure that we are keeping up with things, because that's really important to us. It's important to our open source roots, but then also being like, oh, well, all the people who are using DBT at scale are complaining that we need to up performance on this particular function. And that's something that like we do have to prioritize, because it's now being sussed out, and it never would have been sussed out before. So I think that as you start really scaling a product and formalizing its semantic versioning, I think kind of what goes hand in hand is that the nature changes a little bit. Not to get too philosophical here, but I can't help but feel there's a bit of an epistemic or metaphysical kind of phenomenon that goes along with maturing as a product, and kind of the attitude and dimension changes around it.
I really like that a lot. Thanks, Mila.
Yeah, thanks. There is definitely a big change from, like, I mean, you say, oh, I love the dopamine hits of releasing something that didn't exist at all, and it's like, well, yeah, that's because there used to be nothing. And like as a team of 4 with like 200 models, so we are not Pepsi as far as I can tell. I would love it if compilation got 10 times faster and I didn't have to wait 3 minutes to test a model run. So I mean, that is the next step.
Right. This is something we've been talking about. I've got at least one, maybe more folks in here who do core engineering work with me. And something we've talked about is like everything DBT does today is really compelling. And if all we could do was take everything it does today and scale it up to as fast, as big of a project as you would want it, that would be, we could ride that, coast on that hill for a pretty long time. Obviously, we want to do more than that, but that's a big piece of it. I only just remembered that there's a Slack channel associated with this breakout room. So I've been reading a couple of the messages that are in there, which are great. It's staging-breakout2 for anyone who's on the Zoom call and not in the Slack channel. In fact, there are more people in the Slack channel than are on the Zoom call. So who knows? However you want to engage, it's a multimedia experience. But there's a great question from Jeff about the future. Drew kind of hinted at, which is like a client server functionality. One of the great things about DBT is that it's so lightweight. If anything, we're thinking about making it more lightweight. So Jeff also asked about the use of a DBT server hosted somewhere. Worth acknowledging, DBT has a server. It's the remote protocol server, uses JSON schema protocols, is open source, can be used and set up and hosted by anybody. It just so happens that DBT Cloud uses and hosts it to power the development environment, to power the IDE. So, we are still thinking about building those things, always at the core of what DBT is and does, always open source. But one version of this that I think would be really compelling is in a world where DBT is able to parse projects super quickly, which is not something it can do today, but we want to get there, and we're putting a lot of work into getting there. Then yeah, the idea of parsing your project, having a parsed representation of that project and sending it off to a server somewhere else for execution, I don't know. I mean, that opens up a lot of doors for us that aren't possible today, because actually DBT needs to be kind of heavier weight. It needs to be a do everything all at once, all in the same invocation. And I don't think that's a world that's going to come in the near term, but stabilizing those APIs and stabilizing those contracts gives us the opportunity to think about those things with a little more confidence than we can do today, when like people are using DBT in lots of different ways, and we need to think about all those ways anytime we're going to change anything to, I don't know, rename source paths to be model paths instead. Hopefully that's not a breaking change for anybody, but we never know.
Well, and again, I think one of the big questions becomes as the people who are using DBT change, that I mean, really what kind of changes we choose to prioritize and what those changes really mean is going, like, if we continue developing the way we are now and we never interacted with large scale companies, DBT would look very different in 5 years than how it's going to look in 5 years on the current path it's on. So I don't know. I think it's really interesting as we start to ossify, behavior of the product. It's like, well, what does that, what does the future hold? And am I having FOMO about what alternate reality DBT would have?
Yeah, I don't, Mila, if I could prompt you on that, like, what if you could snap your fingers and have alternate reality DBT? I don't know, in one meaningful way that it would be different. What would you?
Oh, that's hard.
I know it's tricky.
Let me see. I think that I'm seeing DBT evolve into a stable emphasis on security and stability, warehouse management tool.
Yeah.
And I think what I want to see out of DBT is, in this alternate reality scenario, is, I don't know what the right adjective is here, maybe edgy, but like, something that's more a sandbox for the new techniques that are coming out, right? Like, you and I, like, so for example, let's just say it's like a year and a half ago, the big thing is like ML, right? So it's like, okay, let's have a version of DBT. Let's just try to cook up a bunch of ML features. And that's just not going to happen.
That was me a year and a half ago, Mila. That was, you nailed it right on the spot.
Well, and I mean, like,
I'm glad it didn't go anywhere. Yeah.
No, for sure. And I mean, like, and granted, those kinds of experimentation won't really happen as much. I just wish that even if those features don't get built in, it would be cool to be able to kind of attack some of those things more. But I think we're going to have to rely more, like, the response. Here it is. The responsibility of being a major version API is that you have to answer to the needs of the community more than you can kind of experiment and lead on your own. And I think that that's a really important thing for product development, because now you have, like, your users are your shareholders in a way, and you can't piss off the shareholders, right?
Well, so Mila, I completely agree with that, and I would push back in one important way, which is to say that we are both, the keepers of the flame, in a sense, the soon-to-be 1.0 major version API, and we're also community members.
It's true. It's true.
And I regularly relish the opportunity to, sometimes on the weekend, just to like really feel the difference, put on my community member hat and do janky things with DBT, like parse the manifest and see if I can, or I don't know if you know this, I have a house in the country. It's called the DBT external tables package, and none of my like PM responsibilities exist there. And you can hack into the graph object in as many awful ways as you like. But yeah, just to remember what it's like to build something on top of, or kind of like alongside this, you're right, much more stable, secure, reliable interface.
That's what I just really want to see, is if we could preserve at least an opportunity. If that continues to be a part of our ethos, I would be extremely happy. That's the succinct way to put it.
And I would even challenge folks here who have gotten into a good place with your analytics engineering practices, hopefully using DBT, like, take the time for yourselves as well to give yourself hack days, whether that's contributing DBT features, as I know, Joel, you've done a very good job of doing. I tend to sense it's in the evenings and weekends, or kind of on top of, or to the side of. But like, there's so many open tickets, not just in core, but in the docs website, on some of the adapter plugins. If you ever just like want to mess around with Spark, you can, at least in a Docker container version of it. There's lots of threads that still have the minor patch version feel to them, that are all on the fringes of the tapestry we're weaving together.
And to that point, I just want to say, because I think I'm especially to people who are not as familiar with our ecosystem, I think I'm over signaling the importance that larger institutions play in deciding, how we respond as a team. I would just like to say to anyone who is kind of new, like, look, our goal, I mean, at least while I'm on this team, is to keep us as close to the pulse of the community as possible. And that's something that I think other teams I've seen kind of pay lip service to, but I think that it's a really important part of our, because it's where we came from, frankly, is like, if we can always kind of keep things just being a little hacky, that's really cool. And to that end, we're always looking for ways for people to get involved. And honestly, like, I know that like the way dev works at other places is like, contribute to an issue and we'll send you a t-shirt. I'm not making that ask at all. It's more like, hey, like, we want to work with cool people on cool problems. And if you want to work on a cool problem, like, oh my God, we're so here for it. So
as someone who's contributed to an issue, they totally are. Like, I'm not sure how many people on the call have done any contributions to the project, so I'm just going to pitch for a bit. But like, I program passingly well as long as the framework is already there. Like, I have never built something from scratch, and so the fact that the Fishtown team have all of this infrastructure on behind the scenes, that I made my first change to the doc site. I could not make it build on my computer for love nor money, so I just gave up and just pushed like 10,000 requests to GitHub and just made their CI job do it. And it was a slow process, but it worked. And then eventually I worked out how to make it work properly. But I would have given up before then if I had to first understand how Webpack worked, because I have no idea how Webpack works. But I know that if I push code to GitHub, I can wait like 3 minutes and it will be there on a Netlify app and I can see what's going on. And so it is a very, very approachable onboarding to contributing to open source.
Yeah, which is, oh, go ahead, Jared.
And it should be even easier. I mean, there's stuff we can do and should do to make it so that contributing doesn't require like 8 different Python environments. But yeah, I appreciate that a lot, Joel. We don't have a t-shirt to send you, but we do have a Circle CI credit limit. That's what we got.
And I am actually wearing the t-shirt, so.
Fair enough. That's for being your all-around self. Yeah. No commits were made in the obtaining of this t-shirt. Well, we've got just a couple minutes left, so I want to throw it open. If anybody's got any questions that they've been hanging on to, either in this Slack channel or really feel free to unmute yourself and throw it out there. And if not, that's okay too. We can just keep on plugging the exciting world that is being actively engaged in DBT development, whether that's contributing the fix to an issue, and really there are a lot of very, very simple ones you don't even need to know Python for. If you can find them, they're often tagged good first issue in the DBT repo. Or if it looks like joining that DBT pre-releases Slack channel, well, my last plug for it, this really, really is the best way to make sure that the next version of DBT is going to work on your project. And it might just be that you are the special person who has like the very clever macro as an argument to the accepted values test. I saw Grant's tweet this morning, and we accidentally did something that stopped that from working, and you can let us know ahead of time. It's really the best way for you to advocate for yourself, and also.
Or you can write the pull request that sneaks the exception back in so that you can have your code back.
That's how they do it.